The mission is to find your creative essence and express it and feel fully alive in that expression. And there are practicalities to figure out if there is a way to be able to live like that. But that is the fun of it in some ways. You know, if I look at my Venn diagram now, writer, storyteller, animal tracker, somehow it's all working, and there's coaching in there, and now that has resulted in speaking and storytelling. People pay me to do these things, and I have no idea how that really came to be. You can't go to like college to study for this job. It's just been consistently figuring out what I love to do and then finding ways to share it. That has been a formula that's worked for me.
Boyd Varty is a lion tracker, author, coach, and storyteller who brings forth ancient wisdom to help others find deep meaning and purpose in their life. In this conversation, Boyd shares how you can apply many of the same principles he's learned from tracking lions in the wild to discovering a path that's uniquely you.
Tracking, in a way, is you can find and follow a very unique path that other people wouldn't even be able to see. And I think that when you get into inner work, it's the same journey. Something in you knows, but you have to learn to follow that path to knowingness, to integrity, to what life is calling you to.
Boyd shares how an essential ingredient into living into your calling is changing your relationship with uncertainty.
Tracking, if you just think about the principles or the mentality of the tracker, you have to be comfortable with the unknown. You have to be willing to set out and teach yourself to attune to certain things. Amidst like tons of information, you have to see what's important to you, and you've got to train yourself for that. You have to figure out how to handle losing the track. You have to learn to work with what I would call the first track, which is the infinite possibilities. All you need is a track, and then the next clear track, and then the next clear track.
Boyd also believes we must rebuild the relationship with the intelligence in our bodies.
You just ask yourself from wherever you're sitting right today, like after every encounter, every meeting you have, how does my body feel? Every thought of activities you have to do, how does my body feel? And the awareness will start to guide you. In the tracking space, we call it developing track awareness.
Many people think this way of living may be risky or unrealistic, but Boyd shares how when you discover and align to your track, things tend to come together around you.
I think that if you can actually really tap into that unique expression, almost always there's new economies that want to form around it now. And I think a lot about ecosystems around, you can almost imagine like your own creativity, your own uniqueness is almost the rain in the ecosystem. And then things will want to grow, and sometimes it'll not be just one thing. You know, like I have 5 or 6 different jobs that I do now.
Before we get into this conversation, I want to ask you to join this amazing community of consciousness explorers. This whole idea of pursuing expanded consciousness and the boundaries of human potential while living a modern life is relatively new, which is why we interview revered masters, teachers, experts, and practitioners to help you on your own journey. To stay up to date on the latest conversations, simply click subscribe below and you'll be notified each time a new episode comes out. I am so grateful for all of your support and comments. I love reading them. Now let's dive into this conversation. Boyd, what's up, man?
Yeah, thank you for having me. I appreciate being here.
It's great to be here. It's been really fun for me to get to know you even more than just your book. Recently listening to your podcast, and I found myself thinking maybe we can use this as a jumping off point. You know, at what point did you start to connect your experience as a tracker with the consciousness journey?
What happened for me was, that's a great place to jump off. When I was 23, I was working as a safari guide. And at that time, prior to that, I had experienced a series of very intense traumas. Some physical traumas. I'd been mauled by a crocodile in a river. I had been physically attacked in a home invasion in a house in Johannesburg. And as a result of that, I was very, very frozen internally. And I was also wrestling the weight of family legacy, having been in the safari business, but trying to find my own way. And so all of that was going on inside of me. And I was working as a safari guide, taking people out. And another guide said to me, buddy, there's this woman who came last year. Her name's Martha Beck. She's an ex-Harvard professor, but she's just a really interesting person. She's coming on safari. You should try and take her out. And so I went into the guide room and I rubbed someone else's name who was going to be their guide. I rubbed their name off like late in the afternoon, like looking around, and I put my name on. And that's how I met my first mentor. And Martha was she's just an incredible coach. Started off at Harvard and then went to Thunderbird Business School. This is like early 90s still, and was teaching a course at Thunderbird on how to interview well for postgraduates. And what she worked out is the way to interview well was to really care about what you were interviewing for. And so she had designed this process to get people in tune with what really mattered to them. But she had also had very deep spiritual experiences. She had had a near-death experience. She was just orientated towards consciousness. And then one day, still in the 90s, she read about herself as Oprah's life coach. So she was very early into that space. And I took her out for a few days, and we had a few profound moments. The one was while we were driving, she looked at me and we were chatting on the safari vehicle, and she said, the restoration of the planet will come out of a shift in human consciousness. And when she said it, I literally felt my whole body like light up. And I felt
my body light up.
I felt myself like lean forward, and I was like, who is this? And something in me recognized something about what she just said, and also the way she carried herself, who she was, like, there's something here. And so I was aware of it. And then on about the third day, we had a beautiful morning, been out in the wilderness. And just as we were sort of getting back to camp, she turned to me, and the other guests had gone away, and I was holding my rifle and standing by the vehicle like, kind of the macho safari guide. And she looked at me, and she just looked at me with such clarity, and she said, I can see how stuck you are inside, and when you're ready, I'm here.
Wow.
And it was such a recognition, and her presence in the delivery, I just felt so seen, and immediately I felt something crack open inside of me. And then she started to coach me. The next day we went out and we went tracking, and we followed a rhino for a couple of hours. And when we finished that, she said to me, you and I do the same thing. I was like, well, what do you mean? She's like, I help people tune into the track inside of them, what they know to do that is deeper than just the rational ideas of what they have to do or should do. I take them deeper than their social conditioning, and I take them into what I would call their true nature, their essential knowing, what native cultures would call your medicine way, and what I have come to call the track of your life. And so immediately this art form that I had grown up with as a kid, like thousands of hours tracking, I started to see it differently. And if I were to say tracking, if you just think about the principles or the mentality of the tracker, you have to be comfortable with the unknown. You have to be willing to set out and teach yourself to attune to certain things. Amidst like tons of information, you have to see what's important to you, and you've got to train yourself for that. You have to figure out how to handle losing the track. You have to learn to work with what I would call the first track, which is the infinite possibilities. All you need is a track, and then the next clear track, and then the next clear track. And so this started to happen. So then what sort of bridged out of that is I was tracking, but I was also traveling to America all the time to sit in workshops where I would watch her guide people and watch her help people go into this deeper knowing in themselves. And that's where I just started to see these incredible parallels. And tracking in a way is you can find and follow a very unique path that other people wouldn't even be able to see. And I think that when you get into inner work, it's the same journey. Something in you knows, but you have to learn to follow that path to knowingness, to integrity, to what life is calling you to. And so that's how the first kind of sparks started to fly.
Wow, what an amazing story. I'm sorry you had to get mauled by a crocodile to get there.
Well, it's funny, trauma is almost always a doorway. Not that we would ever wish it on anyone, but almost certainly if you've had severe traumas, you've suffered, and there's also a doorway there into the work. Yeah,
there's always wisdom.
Yeah,
it's always
wisdom. Certainly, I don't think for me I would have entered into the path without some of those experiences.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, it's almost, my experience has been that without that trauma, there wouldn't be a capacity to serve in the same way.
Yeah.
It's kind of like you needed to go through that
Yeah.
in order to contribute in your unique way.
And there's the sense that when you've suffered, it's literally carving compassion into you, you know. And so when you're out of suffering and you see someone suffering, you don't have to necessarily go into it, but you know that place, and there's a powerful compassion to knowing that place.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, you know, I think a lot of people get enchanted by this idea of just like following one step in front of the other of the track of their life, but the practicalities of dealing with uncertainty, figuring out what you actually want to do is really hard for most people.
Yeah.
In fact, I would say the biggest, you know, crisis of my generation seems like, you know, people not really finding their true calling in life.
Yeah.
And being able to follow it even when they have an inkling of an idea. And so where do you usually start to try to help people focus when they recognize that, you know, perhaps this is an intellectual pursuit, perhaps this is something that requires you to go inward?
Yeah. Well, the first thing, all tracking, if you imagine a lion roared out there somewhere in the wilderness and you want to go find it, the first movement is always to surrender into not knowing. And that is very, very hard. Almost always when I start coaching someone, you know, they report a feeling of being stuck. They report a feeling of being like, I know there's something for me, but I don't know what it is. They report things like, you know, when I know exactly what the next thing is, then I'll be willing to let go of this safe identity, safe job, safe space. And true transformation always begins with not knowing. But it's incredibly challenging because most of us were conditioned from the time, you know, we first got into school that you have to know. We live in a culture of needing to know. Everywhere you go, it's like you know and you get it right, or you don't know and you're in danger. So that's the first part, is actually just, but at the same time, an incredible thing happens when you're working with someone who's really stuck or is on the brink of a huge change, and they can say, I don't know how to do this. I don't know, and that's okay. And quite incredibly, when someone, and if you just think about all the anxiety of even like a career change, but I don't know what my next thing is, there's so much anxiety to it, or, and these transitions come for all of us, you know, you change career, your relationship status changes, the kids are leaving, there's these like identity shifts, and I don't actually know how to move forward. So the first thing is I don't know, and that's okay. And I say to people, like, start to just practice being comfortable with not knowing. And it is very challenging, but you can work at it. You can see how anxious trying to figure it out is making you, and just take a breath into the spaciousness of I don't know. But what's almost mystical about it is the minute someone really drops into I don't know, suddenly, almost out of a deeper, more natural part of them, knowings ironically start to arise. And you see how all the anxiety of needing to know was keeping that deeper knowing out of the way. So the first thing we do is rest into not knowing, and then we start to pay attention to what I would call starting to attune to the tracks. And those tracks will sometimes literally be images. You know, you might see a picture that you feel something like move in you. Like when I met Martha, I literally felt my body leaning forward. You might think of there's people who inspire you. So you start to attune to that, and they start to come. But one thing that you definitely need if you're going to do that is you have to have some access to the way the body wants to talk to you. And I would say that the body, like, is one of the oldest, wildest things you have. And the tracks that you are looking for are energy expansion in the body. So you want to notice who literally, the people, places, experience that expand your energy. That you notice you forget about time when you're involved in these things. That you literally feel yourself leaning forward when you see that activity, that image, that daydream. It fills you up. And it's quite remarkable, if you can just get those two steps in place with someone, how quickly they can start tracking. calm into not knowing, and then start to pay attention to the track of the body. Anything that literally feels like aliveness, expansion. At the same time, you might also notice what feels like contractions. And if you just start to follow that, it's very practical. You know, in my day, what gave me a little bit more of a boost of energy? What do I feel a little bit of an uptick of energy when I first feel it? You know, for me, that was, I was, just as I was starting to go into this transition, I went out in London. I was still the salesman of the safari business. I would go and try and tell agents to send their clients to come on safaris. And I went out to a party in London where I'd gone on a sales trip. And me and a friend of mine did that thing and I was severely just depressed. I was closed. A friend of mine did that thing where you like make up an identity for the night and you just like try on something. So I was introducing myself. I don't know, I was 23, 24. I was introducing myself that night as a writer. And every time I said it, I would feel this like little like expansion in energy. And I realized that was my body saying to me, there's actually something there for you. And that is literally the reason why I first started writing. Because in my depressed state, the only place I could feel a little like expansion of energy was towards that. So that's what I would say. And then I would say the next step is to...
Can I ask you a question about
please.
that? Is that somatic attunement?
Yes.
Or interoception is a word that I've heard a lot of people use. Is that available to someone that hasn't spent a lot of time, you know, maybe meditating or contemplative practice or somatic practices?
I would say that almost everyone, if you just say to someone who's, you know, still pretty shut down, closed off, start to just pay attention to it, just the awareness will start to guide you. And for me, when I was still, if you could think, there was a density of almost consciousness on me, like a crust from shutting down my feelings for so long, I couldn't read it very subtly, but I could get, it feels a little bit like freedom or like a little bit like constriction. And those were the only two poles I had, free or constricted. And within that, there's a much more subtle range. But with awareness, almost anyone can start to attune to that. You just ask yourself from wherever you're sitting right today, like after every encounter, every meeting you have, how does my body feel? Every thought of activities you have to do, how does my body feel? And the awareness will start to guide you. In the tracking space, we call it developing track awareness. And so when I was a kid, the Shangan trackers would take me to a path and they would say to me, okay, walk down this path and come back and tell us what tracks you see. I walked down the path and I'd come back and I would say, I can see where a hippo walked down the path here. And they would say in Shangan, Fambo lang gute foot. Saying, young boy, go look again. And then as I went back, I could see where a squirrel had run across the path, and you could see where a leopard had walked and it had been scuffed out. And there was information there, but you had to keep teaching yourself to see it.
That's right.
And that idea is probably still the central idea of any coaching work that I do now, or any kind of life tracking. There's information there, but you have to teach yourself to see it. It helps so much if you are contemplative. It helps so much if you have some kind of stillness practice. It helps so much if you are practicing being somatically attuned. But even if you're not, if this is your first rodeo, starting right now, just start to pay attention to what energizes you and what shuts you down. And that is how you develop your track awareness.
That's beautiful. It reminds me of the first time, probably about a year into my journey, I started to experience synchronicity for the first time, where I was like, I'd have a thought, and then like somebody would call me related to that. And there's just all of these things. And I'm like, oh my God, this is crazy. And I remember someone that I spoke to the whole time that was just a little bit further along would have been like, you know, the funny thing is that this has been happening the whole time.
Yes.
You just didn't have the capacity to see it clearly.
Yes.
And I think that's one of the most interesting things about awareness and consciousness is that you're right. There's all this information that's trying to support us right in front of us. And it's really just kind of growing that capacity to start to see it.
That awareness, always the awareness. And then normally what will happen is, as you start to practice that, there will also come, and I think this is a big part of the journey, So if we were to say, let's just talk about transformation. You learned to rest into not knowing. You started to develop your track awareness through how your deep inner self wants to talk to you as energy in your body. Then almost always what will occur too is there will be belief structures that are built in. And some of that is what I would say is conditioned response. And then also beliefs about what the world is, how the world works, just how it is. And definitely as you start to follow that somatic feeling, you will start to run into your own belief structures. It's like, well, you can't just do that. Right. You can't make a living doing that. Like, if we all just did that, I would just be selfish. There's a whole like everyone has their own cluster of rules. And the minute you work, and you can work with a diverse array of clients, and you will find we all have personal religions. And so the next phase out of that awareness becomes, one, noticing when conditioned response is being activated. So I'm actually not able to choose what I want to do because I just through belief and through conditioning, I'm just reacting. And then questioning those limiting beliefs become a huge part of the next phase of really shifting the transformation into a more aware, awakened state.
And you said, and I think you said Byron Katie was a big influence to you. Isn't she not the one that, is this actually true?
Yes.
Is this really true?
Yes.
Right. And
so Katie's like, you know, like you want to get good at all these different things. One, feeling the body, but then when it comes to questioning limiting thoughts, and you'll know they're limiting because they cause you tremendous amounts of stress, right? And so the classic one is, well, you can't make a living doing that, would be like a classic one.
What came up for me when you were describing this is that following our inspiration isn't safe.
Exactly. Like, and people won't accept this, people won't accept me. There's like all sorts of rules. And so that's where you want to find the thought that is limiting, write it down, and then I've found Byron Katie's system of meditation to be very powerful, because if you try and push a thought away, so if I said to you, well, just stop thinking that, it's almost like the egoic mind likes that. And so her system, instead of trying to push fearful, stressful, limiting beliefs away, you hold them in awareness, and you get to know yourself. And so the first question is it true? And now you're meditating. Is it true? No. If you get a no, then you move on to, and now you're watching, who am I? What happens when I believe the thought? Okay, so now I'm just getting to know myself. What was your thought? I'll do it myself. Following your inspiration isn't safe.
Following inspiration is not safe.
Okay, so I've had that one. So now, who am I when I believe that thought? I feel guarded. I feel like I have to keep a secret. I feel irrational. I tell the story that no one's ever really fully succeeded at this. What comes up for me is I just notice myself being really guarded. I don't open myself to inspiration. I think that I have a better idea about how it should be. So this is all just happens out of this one thought, but it shapes all of these behavior patterns. I notice I don't leave my job. I want other people to stay safe by staying where they are. Because if they're following their inspiration, that starts to hit this bad place in me. So I become the sort of person who's always saying, you can't do that. You can't do that to other people. So now you're just watching, getting to know, and seeing what insight there is there as you learn how that thought. But instead of saying, stop being like that, you're just keeping it with you. And then the next part, who would you be without the thought? I would be more courageous. I would be more open. I would try things. I would follow my inspiration. I would be playful. I would allow myself to find out versus thinking I know. I would just be way more willing lightheartedly find out. And then the final thing is you would turn it around. It is safe to follow your inspiration. Well, that's certainly been true for me in writing. It's been true for me in relationships. So now I just start to find how that just might be true. It's not safe to not follow your inspiration. So she's just opening the mind.
Yeah. Because we're almost looking for confirming evidence around to keep us safe.
Yeah, exactly.
Always.
Exactly. So she forces you to just explore in a single thought. So I hope that made sense. It's a bit all over, but it's just a way of sitting with.
It definitely does. And I know in my own journey, and there was actually someone that I was coaching recently that's talking about this. I think there's this idea in kind of the new age culture or whatever that like you think your thoughts into reality, like your thoughts become a reality. And so it's like, if you have a scary thought, if you have a bad thought, you need to get rid of it because you're gonna manifest it.
You're gonna block your flow, or
it's like I've canceled, like, oh, you thought it, now you're gonna have it. And it's like this whole thing. And I'd be curious to hear your opinion about what they're actually talking about there. But I would share that my own experience is that welcoming and accepting as a first step is way more productive than trying to incessantly counter or block things out.
Absolutely. And I think that it's just a case of the more you sit in thoughts that cause you stress like that, the thought load of the mind will drop. So just like the density of thought drops, and what it drops to is being a lover of what is, a real state of acceptance. And there's some version within that of of moving from a consciousness of by me to through me to as me. If you think like there's still a consciousness in my thoughts are creating my reality, and if I'm having bad thoughts, it's still very by me. And that's not bad. Awareness that you are having limiting thoughts, awareness that you are having perhaps thoughts that bring you down, awareness that you have a self-critic, it's important. Sit with them so that you can create more of a space that there's just less I in what wants to flow through you. So, when I think about manifesting, I think it's just, at its highest levels, it's just total surrender to what I am, and there's just trust in whatever wants to come through. And I might shift and put intention on things, but I'm in more of a state of faith that what is for me is coming out of that vibrational state, versus like, I had limiting thoughts, so I've messed up the vibration. Right. I must do my mental hygiene. I must question limiting thoughts. I must be aware of conditioned response, but then I let go into trust in life on some level. So it's a dance. It is
a dance, and it's a beautiful dance when you actually get comfortable with it.
Yeah, and at a really, really miraculous levels, like surrender to what is occurring, like whatever reality is a very, very high state of union with life. And that's not to say you can't change it, but in some ways, being more awake is just being okay with whatever is happening. And suffering is what's happening and how I think it should be are different. When I can question that and get into a more open state, it's not that I don't have access to action. It's just it's not coming out of this like egoic mind state. It's coming out of that knowing.
I hope you're enjoying this conversation so far. If you like what you hear, let me know by clicking like, subscribing to the channel, and responding with a comment around something that you found interesting in the conversation so far. In addition to these videos, I do a lot of writing on the exploration of consciousness and my own personal revelations in my newsletter called Consciousness, the Doorway to Human Evolution. To receive these updates and more, all you need to do is simply head to the link in the description below, and you'll be added to the community of 20,000 plus consciousness explorers receiving weekly ideas and inspiration in their inbox. I look forward to hearing from you there. Now let's get back to the show. Right, and I imagine from your tracker perspective, you have a greater capacity to see and work with what's emerging from that state.
The entire gig with tracking is awareness. If you're with an incredible tracker, you can see this. They're in attunement with their body. They're reading information that's around them. They're attuned to the auditory scape. They're sensitive and aware. And like you think of like classic masculine stuff is like, be strong, be hard. Like trackers are sensitive because the natural world is talking, and so you want to be in that, cultivating that sensitive awareness, so that you can glean this incredible amount of information. And I would say then too, like, once you practice this for a while, as you were saying earlier, like you can feel where the energy of your life is, and you can feel where there's a natural pull, and you just consistently live towards that. In a state of almost constant creative response. Like that's where the energy is now. So there's no rigidity of this is what I should be doing or have to be doing. You're feeling all the time where the emergent energy is. It's a really wild way to live.
It's fucking amazing.
It's a wild way to live.
It is. And I think something that you talked about, that I've heard you talk about, is this notion of like your life being a creative expression of your essence. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of people like that idea, but then there's this other voice or concept that comes in that's like, well, how am I going to make a living? Mm-hmm. Like what is that? I have food to put on the table, What is the practicalities of that? And I would just be curious, like what advice or inquiry you would pose to those people that's kind of how they're reacting to it. Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's the classic, right? The funny thing is that it is also true that money is a state of mind, and so you just need to coach your first multi millionaires who are also worried about if there's going to be enough, right, to see that it doesn't actually go away because it lives up here until it goes away, and you clear that piece. It's always here. Even incredibly wealthy people worried that they're going to lose they
get the money, they obsess over losing it.
You've met them. They're out there because it's this state of mind.
Right.
So what I would say is that it is a journey to finding a way. One, I think the mission is to find your creative essence and express it and feel fully alive in that expression. And there are practicalities to figure out if there is a way to be able to live like that. But that is the fun of it in some ways. If I look at my Venn diagram now, it's like writer, storyteller, animal tracker. Like there's somehow it's all working, and there's coaching in there, and now that has resulted in speaking and storytelling, and people pay me to do these things. And I have no idea how that really came to be. You can't go to like college to study for this job, but it's just been consistently figuring out what I love to do and then finding ways to share it. And that has been a formula that's worked for me. But there, on the journey to that, there was certainly a lot of times of like, wait, does this work? Can I do this? So you just got to keep at it. There's that Joseph Campbell quote where he says, the one that's known is follow your bliss.
I was going to ask you about that, so I'm glad you're bringing it up.
Follow your bliss, but then people just stick that on the back of their car, and they don't put the rest of the quote in. Follow your bliss. Many people will not understand and will actually judge it, but you will be in your life. So there's a phase as you start to want to figure out what actually brings me to life and start to express it, that it can be very, very confronting. And you have to confront this expression with practicalities, figure out how to bridge your way sometimes into something, So it's not
Yeah.
like a one size. It's not just like, hey, just follow your flow. But it is true that if you do find something unique to express, there is a feeling of life wanting to support you, and you have to question the scarcity of the mind and the scarcity in the culture. Otherwise, you'll never be free, even with millions and millions of dollars. So it has to be inside out. And sometimes I would say too that the aliveness of following this is its own kind of wealth.
100%.
Yeah.
100%, because I think if you just looked at all of these rich people who are constantly going on vacation and doing fancy things and blah, 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 what are they really trying to do? They're trying to feel alive.
Yeah.
They're trying to feel alive and use money as the external world and money as a way to do that, when there isn't a more direct path, I believe.
Yeah.
Which is the inside out path.
Well, the classic is like, someone who's really safe, good job, stock options, whatever, and they're like, I feel dead. So you're like, okay, well, why don't you like let it go? That would be really, really terrifying. Be like, also kind of alive.
Yeah.
So you gotta feel your way into it. But I think that if you can actually really tap into that unique expression, almost always there's new economies that want to form around it now. And I think a lot about ecosystems around. You can almost imagine like your own creativity, your own uniqueness is almost the rain in the ecosystem. And then things will want to grow. And sometimes it'll not be just one thing. Like I have 5 or 6 different jobs that I do now. And it's true that it's like, probably if I was just trying to speak, it's not enough. And if I was just trying to be a retreat guide, but all of them together, that's my ecosystem and it works. But and to be fair too, it's like, it takes time to work it out.
Yeah.
So it's been a 10-year journey at least to like get to a place where it feels like I really understand my ecosystem now.
And I imagine if you were just doing one of those things, it wouldn't be as full of an expression.
Exactly.
Of the things that, are authentically you and you care about.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. It's
what are tracks for you at the moment?
Oh man. I think one of the things that I realized is, and we were talking a little bit about this, is that everything that I went through, being a hard charging type A entrepreneur, all that shit, like it was all set up. It was all to help me feel what that experience is like, and then eventually kind of go through this consciousness transformation in order that I could start to help to serve those people.
Yeah.
And so the track for me that feels really alive is that I've seen most people in that world, myself included at one point, have a very compartmentalized view of consciousness. It's like you do your 20-minute meditation and then you do your life.
Yeah.
You go on your ayahuasca retreat.
Sam Harris and then crush it.
Yeah, exactly. It's like you go on your ayahuasca retreat and then like you do all the same shit for the rest of the year. And I feel very fortunate that the kind of wisdom system and mentor and teacher that I had was like, your number one teacher is how you respond and react to every moment of every day. And that's where you start to see yourself more clearly. And so for me, that just made my business a spiritual practice, my girlfriend a spiritual practice, like everything became that.
Yeah.
And it allowed me to have a truly integrated experience where it actually all the activities became less interesting than my examination of how I related to them.
Yes.
And that to me is like been the most enriching journey of my life.
Yeah.
And so I've been writing a book on how to apply this information. And I just am constantly getting tracks and signs from people that are asking me questions every day that the book answers.
Yes.
Which is like an incredible indicator to me that like I'm on the right track.
Yes. That's amazing.
And, one of the things that I talk about in the book, I have this way of describing reality called the responsive reality, where I believe my experience has been there's like this divine intelligence algorithm that is, one, trying to wake you up and consistently spur your conscious evolution, but it's also trying to bring you into deeper authenticity and alignment with that essence that wants to express itself and why it came here. And so, you're just constantly treating reality as a feedback mechanism where it's either like, okay, this is helping me unclear that trauma or that limiting belief, or this is actually showing me like how I intend to contribute.
Yes.
And once you start to like relate to reality that way, instead of some like linear, like if I do X then Y will happen. And it's like, no, life's actually communicating with me.
Yes.
It's like, holy shit, this just got like way more interesting and like way more fun.
Everything is trying to wake you up.
That's right.
It can be truly remarkable to start to see how the field is interacting with your consciousness and bringing in certain encounters and situations, running them against your own integrity, this inner knowing that you start to get in touch with, to wake you up. It's unbelievable.
It's unbelievable.
Yeah.
It's the coolest thing.
Yeah.
And similar to you, like once you start to catch on to this, you're like, how could I not share this?
Yeah.
And moreover, when it comes to healing the planet, when it comes to, improving, like there's so much shit happening in the world right now. Like, just going on Twitter, I'm like, oh my God.
Little doom scroll.
Yeah, seriously. It's crazy. And, at the core of it all is human consciousness. It's exactly what your first mentor said to you, where the restoration and the fundamental solution is helping people move in that direction of self-love and more unity. And
Well, one thing that I saw for years when I was still facilitating a lot of group work, and some of that would be journey work and some of that would just be group work, but over time, almost always, if you saw someone go through any kind of healing process, integration more of the feminine, making spaciousness for wholeness over perfectionism, finding those conditioned responses that were put onto them, or the patterns that would play out, or doing the work, starting to see what their personal religion was. People who did that work to become more authentic, the one thing that I would notice is that there were characteristics of people who started to pop out. Obviously the journey never ends, but in a place where they were starting to get to a deeper acceptance of who they were, what gifts they had to offer and share. There was a little more spaciousness in the mind, and you start to feel that in those people's energy. I would say as someone who's actually followed their track, you can feel it on them, and you've been around people like that because you feel naturally drawn, and you can't say exactly why. You just know like something about them it sort of like has something to do with what I'm meant to be doing. If you're awakening a bit and you start to get around someone like that, but the one thing that I would say is that people like that, some of the characteristics that would emerge is a sense of enough. So a shift out of scarcity into the abundance of I have enough, there is enough. Just you would feel this like energy come into them. Almost always they simplify their lives.
Yes.
And stop wanting more stuff, more houses, more things. There's just a natural inclination towards simplicity. There's a relationship that almost just wakes up with the desire to be in the natural world and to see the intricate intelligence of the natural world and to feel connected to it. They become creative naturally, and almost always there's the desire to be of service. And it's not the sense that like I'm trying to figure out what my purpose is, and I think maybe I'll like work with an NGO, I got to do something. It's just like everywhere they go, there's just a sense of wanting to share and connect. And I thought for some time that if we could, how interesting does the world get with a collective awakening when just more people start to touch that place?
Yeah.
And I think that when Martha said to me, the restoration of the planet will come out of a shift in human consciousness, it's the journey. it's through inner work to just that place of simple enoughness.
Right.
I think that's a very powerful place for most people to abide, and just like not feeling the inclination for more stuff as a medication to feel okay. And almost always that type of stuff starts to result in a different structure of community. So it's certainly, in these modern times where consciousness is a thing, and it's like, do your Sam Harris app and go on your ayahuasca retreat, like the work without love can become just kind of like self-indulgence and spiritual egoism.
It's just the ego doing another form of the productivity and all of that.
And also like something to pitch, some like, now like a product to make out of this. But almost, I just feel like that authenticity that comes into a person, the simplicity, it's really not that flashy. And I think about, I have another mentor who's Jim Deathma, who's the founder of Conscious Leadership Group. And Jim's, I think he's 71 now, and he's got an incredible relationship with his wife. And just being around him as someone who's been really in the work, always spiritual longing, but really in the work since he was 40, it's just a marker of kind of where this leads if done in the right way. And again, like it's not flashy. It's just a presence to someone, a groundedness, a simplicity. Right. Yeah. So that to me is some of the real payoff of living on the track.
I remember the first time I sat down with my teacher, my body just went into bliss. Like my body just relaxed, and I'm like, what the hell is happening here?
Yeah.
Right. And so there is a metaphysical element that happens whether we're aware of it or not, on this path. And the other thing that is kind of coming up for me as we're talking about this is I was having a conversation with a friend yesterday who's like, in a lot of this work, and we're talking about what true confidence is. And what I noticed, similar to what you just described, is like when someone kind of evolves on this path, they don't want anything from anybody.
Yes.
They don't need anything.
Yeah.
And it's this weird, like, it's like a magnet where it's like the fact that they don't need anything from anyone because they have everything inside themselves actually makes everybody want to like help them more and more attractive and more. And that's true confidence. And it's wild.
Just that feeling of incredible containment, and there's no angle.
That's right.
And you can also trust that you're getting a very authentic yes and no because there's just no agenda to the interaction. Yeah, it's very magnetic to be in that state. It's quite a fun game to play, like defining true confidence.
Yeah.
I think, and it's a modern day activism. If you think of how many issues there are in the world, I'm still of the mindset that it's a trick in some ways to be against things. Like actively against or fighting against, or there is, I guess my inclinations are more Buddhist in that way. Like when people just wake up, yes, they know right action to take with integrity, and you're not trying to fight anything. It's just like the most powerful thing you can do is attend to your own awakening. Those type of people with less fanfare seem to have huge impact in their communities, in the world around them. So it's definitely been interesting for me to see, people, there's like people that are talking about we're in a spiritual war and like all this kind of stuff, and lots of polarized thinking that that play into the current state of consciousness, that they have these huge followings. But it just seems like the teachers that I respect the most, that truly have an unconditional sense of well-being, they don't spend any time on that stuff. No, I mean, love, and yet it's not passive.
Right.
Because if you can get in tune enough with your own integrity and self, love will act. It will take action, but there's no kind of identity in it. You're just doing what you know to do consistently, regularly, and the consciousness out of which you're doing it is more attuned to that state of presence.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, in simplifying your life, I do need to ask about your 40 days in nature.
Yeah.
So maybe we could just give a quick cliff notes
Sure.
of what that was. And then I definitely have some follow-up questions on that.
Yeah, so I like to do a form of kind of like experiential journalism in some ways. So one thing, all my life growing up, I would go out by myself into the South African wilderness. And during school holidays, I might go for 5 days or 10 days but I'd always wanted to go for a longer period of time. And there are over 100 accounts from different mystical texts. At a certain point in every awakening, the mystics would go and be alone in nature. The famous one is obviously Jesus going to the desert for 40 days and 40 nights. And so I always had this thing where I wanted to go to be in total solitude for that period of time. And at 40 days, well, I picked it because it's what Jesus decided was the way to go.
Good example.
And I think he's a good master to follow. And then I wanted to write about what occurred to me during that time. And of course, there was never a good time. And then COVID hit. And suddenly the whole world shut down. I made it back to South Africa, and then South Africa shut its doors. So there was the lodge closed. There was no one in the reserve. And it was finally time to do it. And immediately this like incredible resistance came up in me. It's funny when you're going to go and be, off the grid for 40 days, there's suddenly you think like, if I go away, the whole world will fall apart. What about, my business? And of course, that's the first thing you need to get through. And then I got out there and I just had the most incredible time in solitude. I was living in a tree that had a flat platform on it, looking out over a river. And I had a bed and a chair. I had some food in a trunk that I had to lock up to keep the baboons out of. And then once a week, they would drop some food for me nearby. And I just had this incredible period of time by myself, just living in the elements, getting rained on. The scariest, actually, people would always say to me, like, aren't you scared being out there, lions, leopards? Actually, the scariest thing was I was in a storm and the lightning was coming down around me. It's this incredible encounter with the force of nature. It was like 3 hours. It just boomed over my head. And then you would hear this like click, and you would hear that click, and then the lightning would come down next to you. And I realized that it's very rare to be truly, truly afraid in modern life. Like we have a lot of anxiety and stress, but just like next level true fear.
Like fear of death.
Yeah, it's quite rare. And it's funny, like it reached this peak, and then part of me would just like wish it would go away, and somehow like you just can't be this scared. And then it just stayed. And so it was very, very stressful. But then eventually I started singing, and just singing these like wild, like hymns, anything I could remember, just to like move energy because it's just so intense. So, but it was very like in the face of nature. And then other things started to emerge. The one was I would do one thing at a time. And it was like this incredible reminder of almost certainly like, I would say that reverence can't occur at high speed. It also can't occur when you're like riding, whilst listening to a podcast, whilst like quickly cooking something. Like just doing one thing at a time was so incredibly transformative. Other little things that emerged, like where your attention goes, your life goes. So if you put your attention on living things, like aliveness, I felt so incredibly vital out there.
Wow.
My circadian rhythm started to shift. So just as the evening was falling, I'd make a fire, but then usually by about 7, it's dark. So I would go up into the tree and I would sleep. I would wake up at 4. I would wake up incredibly energized. And then one of the pieces of advice that I got before I left was from a tracker who said, just be an animal while you're out there. And then there would be like this intense morning activity till about 9, 10. And then I would feel my energy drop. And instead of like, banging a double espresso, I would just go with it. And then I would sleep for 40 minutes, an hour, and then I would wake up really refreshed. And it taught me my whole energy system without stimulation or stimulants. I really got a sense of my chi system and became way more able to follow my chi. I think was that the right term for it? Like my
Sure, yeah.
I just follow my
the
own like
ebb and
natural
flow.
my natural energy. I really felt that I could feel. One of the deepest encounters was when I first got there. I wanted to practice my tracking, so I would go walking, and I wanted to know the area I was living in, and so. But over the course of 40 days, I started to really feel the experience shift from wanting to know nature to really this feeling of being known by nature.
Wow.
And the feeling of like, this place knows me. This tree, I feel its energy, and I can almost feel it feeling me. It's not just this ground fowl that lives in this area, that it's this fowl, he lives here, and he moves, and he feeds there in the morning, and he roosts there at night. This like personal relationship with the natural world around me. This feeling that I could start to see patterns of the way animals moved, of the way I just deeper levels of the pattern awareness of the ecosystem, and starting to see how intelligent that is. And then the big sort of thing that emerged out of it is that you can't dwell in that every day and not even rationally understand that you're a part of that, but have a felt feeling that I am this intelligence. This intelligence is not just flowing around me. I am a part of that intelligence. And so I could really feel how people who used to live out there, there's just a way deeper sense of the spirit of life.
Right.
And way less, like, after the first few days, way less anxiety, way less just like neuroses. It was a very, very profound experience.
What's interesting, I mean, it sounds incredible. And what's interesting to me about that is, if you look at the history of electricity and you look at things like anxiety and a lot of these illnesses that we've had, there's a strong correlation.
Yeah.
And so I think even just being in nature, right, the frequencies of nature will fundamentally shift your conscious experience.
And this feeling of like going back in time, like I was living how we lived for thousands of years. And the sense of well-being, of just being in that rhythm, and the sense of not worrying about things that are just not for you to worry about. It's really quite incredible when you can't get on your phone and realize like there's 50 things happening in the world that are worth worrying about. Like it's way more presence. So it was a really profound experience. And I mean, I try and go every year now for a period of time of solitude in nature, just to remind myself. Because it's funny, there's like an amnesia. You get out of that environment and you get busy, and there's things you have to do, and there's always like this forgetting of like that state. So it's very mysterious. Like every time I'm in it, I'm like, this is the most important place that I could be, given the momentum of the world. But I always have to remind myself, it's like this modern life will pull you into amnesia, you know?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I remember hearing an interview you did where you talked about being at Burning Man, seeing all the laser lights and all these people on bicycles, and talking about how that actually wasn't what was calling you.
Yeah, I was like, I just remember like looking out over the desert and feeling like I need to be out there, far away. Yeah, what else comes to me that was strong about that time?
Well, I guess a question that I have is like some of the changes that you discussed about like doing one action at a time, or, even just feeling like you're in true communion with nature. Have any of those been able to persist?
Yes. I mean, one is my energy system. I run it totally different now. Like I can feel almost instantly the minute I wake up in the morning, I have a sense of what my energy level is. And if I wake up like refreshed, I can feel it as I open my eyes. And then I really learn to follow my energy. And so there'll be times when obviously you have to push, but mostly I will follow it down when it wants to go down, and I'll shut myself down for almost 5 or 10 minutes, and then it will naturally reboot.
Wow.
So I really learned to follow the ultradian rhythm. That was a big one. funny things, like I remember going into a gym afterwards, like after I had left, and I lost so much weight, and I was so like, I was so active and felt so healthy. And then I went into a gym and it felt like this like weird mechanical introjection to get like on a chin-up machine, or like lift these weights.
I mean, it kind of is.
Yeah, I was like, what are we doing? Like, I'm going to be like sitting around for like 80% of the day, and then I'm going to go into this place and like try and squeeze in all the workout for the day. Like, just like funny things like that just felt like foreign to me. What else can I tell you about it?
Was there any, I know part of the intention was to understand the archetype of the mystic. Mm-hmm. Do you feel like you walked away with like a deeper understanding of like why this is such a perennial practice you saw amongst these great beings?
Yeah. It's a profound experience to be in your own energy for a long time. In terms of developing that awareness and sensitivity, if you could imagine like you're in a certain state, and then your wife comes in, and now you're like interacting with her energy, and then your kid, and then at work, and it takes a long time to just feel what your own energy is like again. It takes about 3 days at least, and then it starts to get real interesting after 15 days of just like, this is so in tune with my own state of awareness. So that's one, seeing the interconnectedness that starts to occur and the stillness that starts to come into you. You're getting stiller all the time because you're not being affected by, oh, there's a war here, or so you're starting to perceive the stillness of the field around you at different levels. And that's also very, very powerful. You're sensing the entire field way more in your body as that sensitivity takes root. And then you're seeing, if you were looking at it, saying the intelligence of life, the infinite wisdom of the creator, it's all there. So that, and it's like, because it's experiential, you're not reading about it, you're feeling it in your own being, kind of like you would in a psychedelic experience. It's so experiential, it's very hard for it to shift. So those were like two very big ones. And then funny things like, you don't get into moods when you're by yourself. And you start to notice how so much of like a bad mood is often for the benefit of someone else, or, benefit. Like it's to kind of like, you want to let someone know you're pissed off, or you're, but you don't actually know why. You don't want to tell them, or, you're angry and you're resentful. So you're just going to be in this vibe for a while so that they can sense it and ask you why. Like there's all these weird things we do that you just don't do in solitude. Like if you think of like clean pain as you bang your hand on your food trunk, and it's like, and then dirty pain as like the story about that, like this always fucking happens to me, and so didn't like put the lock on properly, and that's why you like all these stories about it. Like there's just no stories about things because there's no one
to share them with.
There's no one to like have your little like thing with. So experiences just arise and pass. And that was also really, really interesting, just to see like how much unconscious stuff we're doing to like try and send messages around us.
And like introducing unnecessary complexity that doesn't actually make us happier.
100%. Yeah. And little like stories, and yeah. So I think that some of that too is like things were just moving through me way faster.
Well, for anybody that's listening, I definitely recommend checking your journal entries on your podcast out. We'll make sure to link those out. And I think, unfortunately, our time has to come to an end now. But man, I've loved chatting with you, and I want to give you an opportunity to just tell people what you're up to and maybe what they can follow along that's coming out. Amazing. Thank you. Yeah, and I'm really looking forward to your book too. Thanks, man. Yeah, I think that's going to be a beautiful bridge for people. Hopefully. Who are coming over from the intense A-type startup world. Oh, yeah. Yeah, so if anyone wants to find out more, the podcast is the Track Your Life podcast with Boyd Varty. There's what we've discussed is the 40 Days and 40 Nights season. There's also a new season out called Story Hunter, which is about the power of living as a storyteller. The first part of it is principles of storytelling, and then the second part is actually going story hunting with the Bushman people in the Kalahari. Wow.
So that's new. And the website is boydvarty.com. And you can find podcasts on there, e-learning courses. Anyway, if you want to get a hold of us, retreats, come tracking in South Africa, that's the place to look.
Epic, man.
Yeah.
Well, we'll make sure to link all those
Thank
out.
you so much. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, man. It's been a pleasure. I'm so stoked we got the chance to do this.
Absolutely. Very cool.